Welcome inside another edition of Mountaineer Report here. Brought to you by WV Sports Now. Mike Asti, joining me here, Cody Nespor. We are doing a live edition of the show all over on social media. So if you're listening to this after the fact, anywhere you get your podcasts, of course, we are available Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. This was a live edition of the show. You can also find this on YouTube. Hit that notification bell. Get a notification when any video is uploaded on the channel, and find all of our coverage at WV Sports Now. A lot to talk about, to say the least, since our last show. West Virginia's lost a coach. Fans are kind of freaking out about it. Should they? What to make of it? Spring ball is now in session, even though it's very much winter outside, so it's snowing. But Rich Rodriguez is talking about spring ball, and they're getting it kicked off a little earlier than even most programs this year. And then West Virginia did win their home must-win game against Cincinnati. They do sweep the season series against the Bearcats. Nail biter at the end, but they do win, and did that lock up the NCAA tournament officially for Darren DeVries's Mountaineers. So jump aboard and feel free to comment. We're not going to do this forever, but nonetheless, we are going to start off with Chad Scott's departure. So honestly, Cody, I'm going to be honest with you here. I received a text from somebody else across the country who covers another program about Chad Scott every single time the program they covered had any type of job open that could even flirt with coaching the running backs for probably the better part of the last month. He was in rumors for Penn State in particular, where it heated up a little bit, but he really wasn't a top candidate. And then obviously departs for Texas. You can't turn down that job. We've talked about on this show how his value was so high. It was kind of weird that he didn't get any better offers and kind of fell back on staying with West Virginia, even though he was getting a solid salary. We did also talk about Jaheim making it kind of known that that's why he returned. And there's even rumors of other players returned for Chad Scott, very, very popular coach. He's now with the Longhorns. Same position. You can't turn it down. Same position. Doesn't have to be an analyst. It's the same freaking position. What's your reaction? How much of a hit is this? This does now dispel the entire Neil Brown staff with the exception of Blaine Stewart, who obviously has the legacy connection and that connection to Rich Rod. So it's pretty much everybody besides Blaine Stewart now fully gone from the Neil Brown era.
Yeah. I think this is actually less surprising than when Chad took the demotion to stay at West Virginia, really. Because when that happened, you and I talked about it. It didn't make professional sense for him.
No.
To take a demotion and stay at the school. And this, if this move happened a couple months ago, nobody really would have batted an eye. I think that the timing is a little strange because it's right before spring ball, but hey, if anybody gets the chance to go to Texas, anybody's going to take it. And professionally, it's obviously a great move for him. And as for the hit to West Virginia, it is a big hit. I think without a doubt was the best position coach under Neil Brown. He earned that promotion offensive coordinator.
Okay.
He had the best position room basically every year they were here.
The debate is Matt Moore, but sure.
And then and he did it all with high school guys, which is so rare in this era. And I think it's so telling of his ability to coach, to develop, to recruit, and to retain. We joked a little bit, but
recruit.
Jalen Anderson stayed here. He was in the doghouse for 2 years, and he chose to stay here. Nobody does that anymore. It's not like if a player not even gets put in the doghouse, but it feels slighted at all, they're like, well, I'm just going to go.
Well, also, he's further down on the depth chart. While being in the doghouse, other players ascended over him. Yeah.
I think all that speaks to Chad. And I think it is people are going to, they always turn when people transfer or coach. They always turn on them and say, oh, they weren't any good anyway. Right. No, Chad Scott was really good. It is a loss. I think the timing makes it weird, but the move makes sense. It makes perfect sense for him. And like I said, if this was 2 months ago, you really wouldn't be batting an eye at it.
Yeah, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, a live edition of the show, talking the open here, Chad Scott's departure. Obviously, you can't fault him, and it's a no-brainer, really, and that's why you got, I mean, Cody, we got rumors, reports, and then an hour later, nope, this is official. He's literally agreed already. Like,
Yeah.
it clearly wasn't that much of a thought for him. It did feel like it was a bit weird. It made sense for Blaine Stewart to be retained because obviously he's the son of Bill Stewart and the connection with Rich Rod. It felt a little bit weird. It almost felt like it would be awkward for Chad walking around the facility. He would
Yeah.
just scream Neil Brown, and that's just a tenure that the new staff is obviously not going to want to be connected to. The fans don't even want to be connected to, no matter what you think of it. So that was going to be weird. I will say the only surprise is I knew his value was high around the country. And as I said, I was getting a lot of texts and messages from other media around the country about him. Texas seems like a real step up. And you could argue, and people will debate this based on both obviously having deep runs in the college football playoff this year, even a better job than Penn State would have been. So now he has to move further, but a better job there. It kind of was odd, though. I don't know if you noticed that their announcement was just him amongst a bunch of analysts and other coaches. They didn't give him a graphic by himself. He didn't get treated as a big deal like he probably would have been if even maybe he was hired at Penn State, or like they did treat who they eventually did hire, and certainly how West Virginia treated their coaches they announced. So it's going to be a different world for Chad Scott. He's going to be fitting in. Interesting how he's viewed there, how he's treated there by media, how the players treat him there. This could be an opportunity for him if he gets some players as high draft picks in the NFL that he's ascending to a head coach at a Power 4 in the next few years. If Texas keeps on winning, and there's no reason why they're not. I will say the only thing I think of Chad Scott, and was a little bit odd and he was out of place, is I don't think he fits as a coordinator. To me, he's a weird dynamic as a coach, that he is a player's coach, but he can recruit. He's now learned how to run things. He did do the interim thing, which will certainly help him and may impress Sark. And he's a fabulous running backs coach. But it's almost, for me, that he either is a great running backs coach, and maybe you eventually try him as a head coach. Maybe he jumps to a head coach from there. But the coordinator thing, where you're trying to call plays and skimming out plays, that doesn't seem like it fits him. So if he's going to be a head coach, it seems like he would then be more of a head coach that needs to have solid coordinators around him. Maybe they would still call the plays, and he would kind of be that leader of men type of coach. He's more that rowdy, rah-rah leader of men coach than he would be a play caller. So that's kind of him. But yeah,
that's the Charles Huff career path.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's worked out for him off of what he just did at Marshall, and now moving on and their weirdness of that dynamic. But yeah, that kind of could be him, and maybe he could even have a quicker path and get to the Power 4, obviously, where Charles Huff is still not at, based on getting in the Texas program. I mean, it's a solid spot for him, a solid landing spot. As far as it being a hit, and a lot of fans are freaking out instantly, and obviously if Jaheim would depart, this would be a game changer and would be a real problem for this year. He's really the one player in offense or defense that there's not even a reason to write about. He is the starter. He's not going to have "or" next to his name. It's his job, and he really could step up in that system that'll be catered for him. But aside from his departure, I don't know how much of it then it would be a hit, because again, I don't think Chad Scott fit what Rich Rod's trying to do. You do have Noah Devine there. Maybe he would get promoted. Maybe they may go out elsewhere as well, because Rich Rod's talking about getting a lot of calls. Maybe that's code speak, but we'll see what they do. For Chad Scott's job, it almost sounds like, from what I'm hearing, they're going to try to hire on the outside, but we'll see how quickly that happens and what they do. And he was a great recruiter and did build up and develop the backs, but it almost also seemed like a situation, which is why I don't take this as much of a hit unless Jaheim leaves, that Chad Scott's departure was inevitable. Like, he was never going to be there long term. He fell back on staying there. Every program in the country seemingly had some interest in him. His value was so high. This was not going to be a scenario where you're keeping him for 5 years, and that is what Rich wants to do with most of the staff throughout his tenure, certainly if they win. So this was just inevitable. It's almost like get it out of the way. Get out of the way. He's in a solid spot. Good for him. And move on, and now fully let the Rich Rod era get underway. The timing is a little inconvenient to try to find a a running backs coach, though. And I would imagine this isn't like how Richard's going to do the OC thing. They're going to, I'd imagine, hire a running backs coach, Cody, because the only benefit here of this timing, they got a lot of money now that they can play with. Because Chad was getting a lot of money for being a running backs coach. They already went over for the staff, but now they got his $700K that's just sitting there. And I imagine they're going to give it to somebody.
Yeah, I think who they end up hiring probably changes how the move looks. If they go get somebody
Sure.
who's good or who's, has a good record or is at least thought of as up and coming, then it's like you're saying, like if it was inevitable anyway, go get a good guy who is going to be here for multiple years, and that's fine. If it's somebody, there's a lot of staff moves that haven't, been great on paper moves, and if it's another one of those, then it's like, it's a wait and see thing where, yeah, Chad probably would be better than this guy who only has 1 year of experience or who's never been a full-time position coach or this or that, right? So I think who this ends up being changes it a lot. If it's like, it does feel like they're going to go outside, but if it is like, hey, Pat White's going to be the running backs coach, it's like, okay, he's done that before. Like he's that's a good, decent pick, I think. But it does sound like they're going to go outside, so I think it is. Whoever replaces Chad, it is going to be important insofar, however important a running backs coach can be.
Yeah, and Pat White would make sense because unlike just random former players who wanted jobs, he's been a coach for a long time. He's done that exact job before. And even though obviously he was a former quarterback, which is why he's in there as the assistant QB coach, he one of the greatest running quarterbacks in college football history. So he certainly can coach running backs and the running scheme of Rich Rod that would fit a running back. He certainly can do that. I will tell you, there's no reason to even have any more conversation about this. That I already saw his turn, and I wrote about this. Steve Slayton is not interested. He's not moving across the country to do it. He's not leaving his current lifestyle to do it. That's just not happening. Noah Devine is not a career coach, so he's in there as an analyst, but I do think he's better suited to stay an analyst and work in the facility, help people train, work under a coach, like would have been ideal to learn under Chad Scott. That would have been fantastic for him. Sending him right away, I don't know if he's really ready for that. And I will throw this out there, even though we talked about how now this fully puts them away from the Neil Brown staff, aside from Blaine. They just lost the assistant quarterbacks coach that is viewed as a rising star in the coaching ranks to Virginia, which historically is a lesser program. They had a good year, but it's not like they're throwing tons of money at the guy. That was a lateral kind of move for him, if not a lower job, but he's ascending. He has high value. He likely would have stayed if they didn't bring in Pat White. He was planning on staying. They were planning on keeping him. That was the plan. And Isaiah Macklin is who I'm talking about there. So if you do move Pat to running back coach, better title for him than assistant QB under Rich's son, are you going to have an assistant quarterbacks coach then? Who will that person be? And you lost the guy that was ascending, and Isaiah brought in most of the transfers. He helped develop a lot of them. He was big in Khalil Wilkins, who a lot of people think is kind of a Pat White prototype for the future that maybe Rich Rod will fall in love with. We'll learn more of that as spring ball rolls. So they may not have wanted a Neil Brown guy over the long term, but they were going to keep him, and he just had no real job and end up taking a job where he could ascend quicker. And, the money thing appeared to be even from what I'm hearing, even though generally speaking, you would think it'd be more as an assistant QB coach than he's going to be an analyst at Virginia. But nonetheless, they lost out on that opportunity. So then what are you going to do to fill that? So it's annoying to have to make these decisions, I'm sure, as you're kicking off spring ball, but something will happen staff-wise. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, talking West Virginia's now need for a new coach. Another coach on the staff here with Chad Scott's departure and the opening of spring ball here on a live edition of Mountaineer Report, this Friday morning afternoon show here. A lot to discuss, but we're going to be at it for a little bit longer. I do now want to move into spring ball. It's a little earlier than normal, but Rich Rod was honest and literally said that he wanted to have a full week of coaching meetings after spring ball. So it was going to even be a week later, but then just decided to kick it off now. But this gives him that full week, if not more, before the spring portal opens, which will be part of players like Jaheim will have to make decisions. He's the one to look at again. Obviously, that could go down at any time in terms of reading the tea leaves, but officially could go down then. Anyone who loses a job could go down then and could leave then. And then also Rich Rod, he was very honest. He actually, Cody, the only thing I really find interesting about this so far with Rich Rod that I actually do like, I mean, I like coaches that keep it real. Neil Brown never would have been this blunt. Rich Rod literally said, we're going to make cuts. I mean, he said the word cuts. I mean, that's what it is. We've known that in this transfer portal era, obviously players can leave on their own, but coaches are also releasing or cutting players like it's the NFL. But I haven't heard many coaches literally refer to it as a cut. And that's going to happen. But they're going to make cuts. They're going to release. These are terms that Rich Rod used, and they may be telling players to go in the portal. They may just, say they're not going to work and just may literally cut them in general, scholarship-wise, depending on what that number ends up being. So you heard from Rich Rod. We'll get to Zach Alley in a moment. Any takeaways from what he had to say? Any interesting tidbits? We're going to be talking to him a lot. I will tell the fans coming up. He's going to be speaking at least 2 to 3 times per week. He's not giving much away in terms of any position battles. It's pretty much all open. He liked Nico a little bit last year, but nobody has any type of job. A lot of coach speak from that opening presser. I don't think there was major breaking news out of that thing, but do you have any thoughts on what Rich Rod had to say as we now kick off this winter spring ball?
Yeah, I think, that stuff about cuts and the stuff he talked about NIL, where I forget the exact phrase he used, but like it's going to depend on depth chart position and stuff like that. Obviously, that's a unique way to approach that kind of stuff. It's going to necessitate bringing in certain personalities of players.
Yeah, that's his plan.
Because, we've seen a lot of players become, kind of money focused guys, especially at the highest level. Yeah. Like they want to go places to make money. And if you're telling them, if you're 3 on the depth chart, you're going to make this amount. In terms of high end talent, I don't see how you persuade every single one to do that. Like there might be guys that, their personality, they're fine with that. I also think that could potentially is going to lead to more churn at the bottom of the roster.
Oh, 100%.
Where if the guy who's 4th string is like, well, he only put me 4th string so he could give the guy at 3rd string more money, I'm out of here, right? Like I think that's a scenario, but it's, nobody has NIL figured out yet, except for the Texases of the world who have infinite money. So maybe this will be a good approach. Maybe this will produce, even if there is bottom of the roster churn, maybe there won't be top of the roster churn, which is, you would take that probably.
That's what I was going to say. You like an NFL system, you pay the top guys you rely on the most. And I got to say, even though it's kind of that prove it type of deal, that did stand out to me a little bit too. And there's a little concern there just for the fact that everyone knows there's more money to play with NIL wise than what Neil Brown had. So Neil Brown wasn't doing that. He was kind of giving it out. If you're doing more of a prove it model with more money, it could make players who are thinking about coming aboard, who are even currently there, see what they're getting, see the reports from myself and colleagues, and everyone talking about how there's more money there, and McAfee talking about how there's money all the time on his national show that I'm sure they watch. And then they're sitting there saying, well, I'm getting this, I'm losing my job. People are saying now there's more money. He's holding back money because he wants me to prove it on the field. Why do I need to wait for Rod to hold it over my head like he's my boss when I can get a guarantee of more elsewhere? But that said, Cody, there were some fans, and not just the older heads, there were even some younger fans that were calling for this because the program under Brown, and I think Brown would even admit this, they didn't have as much money as there now, but there were times they threw a lot of money out there and they wasted it. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of waste of money whenever they would get money. So for example, I don't think there's going to be a scenario now, no matter who you are, and JT Daniels was a star and was a veteran, where a player gets 700 plus, gets a house, gets whatever before they even step foot on the field. I don't think Rod's looking for those players. I don't think that's going to fit the hard edge Rich Rod way, because I think he wants them to prove something to him before he's willing to just make it rain on them. And that it's a hard model, though, because there are programs that are going to say you walk in, I will give you the cash immediately. I know you're good. Rich does sound like he wants something proven to him before he's willing to do that, even if there's more money to play with. That is a risk, 100%.
Yeah.
That's what it
and
sounds
I think that's a scenario where, with older coaches in any sport, you always talk like, is the game leaving them behind?
Yeah.
I think if that model of NIL, like, I think it could work, right? I just think you have to recruit the right personalities. And like, I don't know how you get the top end talent saying that unless you can really sell them. But if that model of NIL doesn't work, I do think that's a scenario where this is an older coach who is behind the times and who's missing the boat a little bit. But that being said, like I said, nobody has NIL figured out except at the highest level. Like,
anyway, we're moving into a different.
So
we're moving into a different era with rev share. It's going to be different than what it was, and I benefit too, because there are people that joke that I don't know if Rich Rod really has the knowledge of being this money guy and being able to do this right, etc. Kind of what we're talking about here. Maybe the older mentality. I think as long as Ren Baker is involved and is there, I don't think they're going to waste money. I don't think they're going to be screwed mentally in terms of finances. I think they're going to know what's really going on with whether it be the old NIL model, the rev share, whatever ends up being there in the future. Ren is going to clearly be involved in leading all of that. I'm sure he's going to be sitting down with Rich Rod saying, here's what it is. This is what I would recommend. Rich gives his opinion. And then if it is just this crazy opinion, I'm sure Ren's going to say, no, we got to do this, because this is where we're going. Like, Ren is a younger mentality money guy there that was not there at the beginning of Neil Brown when some of that was wasted, was not there when the finances were screwed the last decade. He has continuously said this model is better for the program. And honestly, Cody, that's even being reported nationally. All the national media members keep saying that West Virginia is this dark horse program, that in the rev share model, they could be way better off than they were in the NIL model, etc. So I don't think Ren is going to let Rich Rod mess it up with an older mentality. I guess that's where I'm trying to go. But yes, it does feel like this is either one way or the other. Either he has a great success and he ends up, honestly, if you look at the resume and where it's going to be career-wise and the overall wins he'll have, etc., if he ends up being this great story, he'll get himself in the College Football Hall of Fame someday, and he'll end up being celebrated there, and we'll forgive the past, etc. Or he won't last more than 2 years. Because I don't think Ren's just going to let the older head mentality ruin the program while he's there. I don't think he's guaranteeing Rich Rod this 5-year run despite the contract, if he's going to be stubborn, if Jaheim leaves. I mean, we might even know in a month and a half. I mean, if maybe Jaheim's just because of Chad's gone, but if there's this max exodus of the starting players because of hard edge and because Rich is pulling money and dangling it, that's going to be a early tea leave that this is not going to be a long-term thing, and that Rich is almost too into his ways to make this work, because you're going to have to give in a little bit to the high-end players. And the program's recruiting in the top 40, top 45 in the country, which is right there with Pitt and other similar programs in the region. Even, it's not ever going to be Texas or Ohio State, but kind of where it's even been in the great years of the program. If that drops outside the top 50, if they're losing players, those are warning signs that they're the players, the recruits, don't like what they're hearing from Rich Rod. But you got to get the right guys for sure.
Yeah. And I was laying out the negatives. I think there are positives to this model, right? It does protect the coaches. It does protect the program from, and I hate to dogpile on him, Garnett Hollis last year.
Yeah.
He was a big pull in the transfer portal. He got a good chunk of money. He was terrible. I mean, he was horrendous. And it
was very, very bad. Yes.
That's a big reason why the defense was terrible, because the secondary guys they spent big money on came in and were bad. And so on the flip side, if you're going to do this model that Rich Rod's doing, if you think a guy's really good and you bring him in and he stinks, I guess you've not blown your budget on him, but I don't know how that's what I keep saying is I don't know how you attract guys that you perceive as high talented, as high in demand, if you're not promising money.
Mm-hmm.
And like, in that scenario, if you say, hey, we think you're going to be a starter, so you'll be one on the depth chart and you'll make this amount, and then he comes in and he's not as good as you think, and you're like, hey, actually you're fourth on the depth chart, so you're actually going to make this. How does that guy not immediately go, okay, well, I'm leaving?
Yeah, and
right?
Garnet Hollis, he sucked. Didn't work
Yes.
out. He might have still maybe come aboard because he did vocally say that he was trying to be the next Beanie Bishop. He wanted to come
Yeah.
for the staff. If they can get Beanie in the NFL, then they certainly could help him. That was what he was telling all of us. So if all that was true, maybe he still would have came for a little bit less money because he really believed
Yeah.
in that. Now, obviously, you hit on Beanie Bishop and you didn't hit on Garnet Hollis, and you can brag about Beanie Bishop forever for the staff, but Garnet Hollis ended up helping to sink that staff, and that's why they're not there anymore. It really didn't work out. That's really one to point to above a star quarterback that you may have to pay right away. Garnet Hollis, I mean, his numbers in the Big Ten were better than this. He had a couple highlights, but it was mostly penalties and missed tackles, and it was just a catastrophe with Garnet Hollis. But yeah, that would be something. Now, you know what you're really doing, and this is what Rich Rod also keeps saying. He even said on the court of the basketball game, he is really betting on his staff because if you're
Hmm.
not going to give them money right away, then you're going to have players who want to come in because not only do they want to be part of the Big 12 and Power 4, but they may have other opportunities, other similar programs to do that. You want to make them really believe that you, Rich Rodriguez, not even just win, because players want to win, but what they really care about is you can eventually get them more money. You can give them a little now. You can get them on national TV a lot, which is the case for WVU, which is a benefit there. You can get them to play in big games, which is also the hope of the program being better than it was under Neil Brown for you as a staff. And you can get them opportunities professionally because you're going to coach them up, make them the best, and then put them in a position to succeed. That is what you really need. You need to have that work then. That puts the onus on the staff and whoever's there to really be viewed as solid coaches. It does put
Hmm.
their own, the onus on you, the staff, to win a little bit in year one. You can't have a 3-8 year like he had a year one 20 plus years ago. All that puts even more pressure on that because you got to sell them on you being there is going to take, you got to almost kind of do, I'll compare this for West Virginia fans. You have to sell a little bit of what Bob Huggins was selling. He was able to get transfers to come in because they wanted to play for Bob Huggins because he's a Hall of Famer and could help them. Eric Stevenson would have taken any kinds of money to play for Bob Huggins at that point. He's vocally said he wished he would have done it years earlier and played his whole career there. And I don't want to talk more about Huggins and make it a mess of a conversation, but that was what was going on then. That's what you need for Rich Rod. You need players that say, I want to play for this guy. I believe he's a Hall of Famer. I'm going to help him get there. And there is more money to play with. So eventually it'll come to me if I prove it to him and he'll make me a better player. That's what you need. Lastly, kind of on what he had to say, did you read anything into anything he said about the quarterback competition that is likely going to be between Nico and Jalen Henderson here, even though Rich Rod will not guarantee it's just between those two. There are other players, but really it's between those two. He did mention a little bit of liking Nico. When I asked him kind of what he's looking for in quarterbacks, kind of danced around it. He basically just gave oh yeah, taking care of the football. Oh yeah, big plays. Like, all that's good. It's like, yeah, okay. Well, what else? What exactly do you prioritize? But he talked more about Nico than Jalen Henderson. I
Hmm.
do keep thinking he's going to fall in love with Jalen Henderson. I have heard that Nico is making more money in NIL, by the way, so that would certainly bump him. He is kind of the incumbent, but he spent more time talking about Nico. Do you read anything into that? Do you believe it to be a fully wide open competition? Do you think there's a 1A, 1B very, very early on?
Right now, I Rich Rod's seen the quarterbacks as much as we have this spring,
Right.
really.
Right.
So I assume he basically said everything he knows. He like, I'm sure in his mind he
It's
thinks
early.
he
Yeah.
has an idea of who's going to be the starter, but they haven't done a practice yet. So um I don't read too much into it.
Yeah.
Quarterback battle, especially this early, it's as much about massaging egos as it is evaluating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't hurt somebody's feeling on day one because then they're gonna probably pout and hop in the portal. um, so
Yeah.
no, I don't read too much into it. Like, plus, I'll just take Rich at his word right now. Like, he isn't really connected to any of these guys in terms of long term. It's they haven't done a practice yet. If he says it's
Yeah.
wide open, I don't think there's any reason right now to not believe that.
Yeah, the fans might be
And
connected to Nico, but he's not emotionally connected to Nico. I know there are a lot of people that think that there's the opinion out there that Nico deserves the job if it's even because he's been around and he's stayed. I do think he might have the pole position, to steal a phrase from Tomlin, because he has film being there. He has been there. Maybe there's loyalty there. I do believe he's getting a little bit more in NIL to stay, but Rich is going to play the better guy. He knows the pressure he's under. He can't just punt a year to help out Nico. And there's no deserve. Rich Rodriguez is going to play the guy that he believes is the best, regardless of deserve. And if that means Nico Markiel hits the portal, but he feels Jalen Henderson can vie for a Big 12 title, he's not going to be worried about Nico Markiel hitting the portal. He's going to play the better QB. I do not think he's going to play the politics that some fans almost want him to. And it's a very weird opinion, Cody, because the same fans that want this program to contend right away, their reasoning for Nico is that he deserves it.
Yeah.
If Nico ends up being the better guy in spring, he should have the job. If it's even, you could even argue him and maybe have it, he goes week 1 and then you keep on evaluating. There are coaches that do that to success. Maybe there should be packages for both of them. And Jalen Henderson has a lot to prove as well. He just sat out a year off of an injury, etc. But the deserve thing, and to have him the guy penned in before you even get together because he stayed in the deserve thing, that is just a bizarre opinion that I don't get, but that exists right now. But I don't think Rich Rod's sitting there saying, "Oh, I'd like to go Jalen, but he deserves it." That is just not the Rich Rod way. No way.
Yeah. That's how I think very few coaches do that, unless you have incumbent starters, right?
Sure,
but I don't think there's a lot of serious contending programs that predetermine who is or isn't the starter based on how long they've been there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole debate on how Brown handled those battles. I mean, we all kind of knew they were farces for the most part. Like, Green was going to get it over Nico. JT was going to get it over Green. Jared Daggy was never going to lose his job while he's there. They were mirage battles. Let's be real.
Oh,
I mean,
I think the first one,
maybe the first one,
the first one
try
after
to argue
JT,
Green and Nico, but
that was Nico a freshman. Was that Nico's freshman year? I think still.
I don't think. Yeah, and that was
so.
Nah, that was still a mirage because while it's similar here that if you didn't give, I think it's similar here in the connection of at that point, Cody, if they didn't give it to Green, he would have had to leave because he already vied under JT. That's similar to what people are saying about Nico now to compare it. The difference here is, and their game tape was similar. The difference here is that was an incumbent staff. That was a guy who recruited. Rich Rod did not recruit Nico Markiel, even though he's liked him and watched some games. And there's a lot more pressure on Rich Rod now than even was on Brown then. There's some parallels, some connections. I get that thinking. I don't think it's similar. They're different mentalities, different personalities, etc. Like, Nico was not recruited by Rich Rod, even though he did keep him. And obviously, if he didn't still want him there, he wouldn't be there. But yeah, maybe way back, but Jared Daggy was never going to lose that job and the defense there obviously is that while Jared Daggy had many issues, Green wasn't ready. Like, he wasn't ready at that point. He wasn't ready. He was, you're not going to play him as a true freshman. Even after that, he didn't have the game film. Once he got it, you brought in JT, who a lot of fans loved at the time, and that didn't work out. So Green wasn't ready then. I don't think Nico was ready to really go against Green at the time before, in that battle before he got some film. And now Nico might be ready, and Jalen Henderson certainly has some value. So now this is more of a legit battle than we've ever seen. I think this is a legit battle right now. Maybe Nico has a pole position, but I would not be shocked at all if Jalen Henderson does not win this job. And I do think he's going to really impress Rich Rod. And absolutely, it's 50-50 money that he could easily win this job, regardless of what we're talking about here on February 21st. Mountaineer Report here, WVU Sports Now, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti. Anything from Zach Alley? The program put out a video. We talked to him now. He certainly explained why he jumped. A lot of this is a Rich Rod connection, even though he did leave a blue blood. He did the respectful thing of even talking highly about Oklahoma and Venerable and situations like that. He does seem like he fits the Rich Rod mold of, prove it to me. We're not ready. We're handing nothing to anybody. Every job's open. Defense is, it's even going to be more of an important spot than Rich Rod's offense, because I think everyone thinks whoever's in there is going to put points on the board. They even did with Brown for the most part, but that defense was just Used to use the word horrendous, awful, terrible, horrible, any word you want. That was the defense. Got to be way better or it won't matter. You could argue there's just as much pressure on Zach Alley as there is on Rich Rod because he's younger. He's made it clear he thinks he's being groomed to be a head coach somewhere by Rich Rod. If that defense is trash again and they don't win, fans will be mad at Rich Rod. But there's a lot of fans that'll point to Zach Alley and give you, though, he's overrated. Oklahoma's defense wasn't great. He's only had success under Rich Rod years ago at lower levels. His value goes down, all of that. So he has a lot of pressure on him, but that's wide the hell open, even more so than offensive wise. There's not a Jaheim White there on defense right now.
Yeah. No, I don't think I have a strong reaction to anything Ali said. I think he said all the right things.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was a really good press conference.
Okay.
But nothing jumped out to me as like breaking news or
no, there was
inflammatory or anything. Like I thought it was good. I thought it was good. I thought he spoke very well. Like I said, I think he said all the right things. I hopefully he gets to talk throughout the spring and in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just to kind of get to know him more, or just to get to hear, because like you said, defense is so wide open. I think it is important, probably for the fans, to hear from him how he feels, and
yeah.
If it comes out and it's all sunshine and rainbows all off season, I don't, are people going to buy that, or
they're not going to sell that clearly. I almost think they're talking down
so,
on themselves versus talking up. It almost seems like they're being harder on the players. And what a lot of fans brought up that you can certainly glean from Rich Rod of the past, but even what he was doing at Jacksonville State, I don't know if you noticed this. I do think more so than Neil Brown, certainly, Rich Rod tried to send messages in press conferences to the team. So I think he was making it very clear, I'm sold on nobody. Everything's open. Nothing's getting handed to you. The same thing he told us at the intro presser and then told McAfee, if you don't want to be here, go. The door's there. He gives the vibe, and it may not be true, but he's intentionally giving this vibe, Cody. He is sweating nothing. He knows the pressure's there. Nothing is the end of the world. The sky is falling is not the case for Rich Rod. He does seem pretty cool, calm, collected, and pretty laid back, and we're going to keep it moving. And if you don't want to be here, I don't spend more than 2 seconds trying to convince you. It seems like how he is with coaches, how he is with players. It's how he was 20 years ago. It's how he is now. He is not messing around. That is, I guess, kind of a mentality you got to respect. You kind of like that. But will that work in this era is the question. What I do want to hit on before we get some basketball involved here, again, you can find every episode of Mountaineer Report everywhere you get your podcasts, and of course on WV Sports Now, is Rich Rod did talk about and literally said that he agrees with what Matt Rule said about the spring game. And for anyone who's not aware, Matt Rule is against the spring game, not doing it. And Steve Sarkisian actually just yesterday, so the same day Rich Rodriguez is talking, he was on Up and Adams saying that he's now against the spring game. And the mentality of coaches is, if you're going to have a transfer portal window open basically a week after the spring game or even a day after the spring game for some schools, why are we showcasing our guys and showing out and giving you highlights that used to be the case years ago? We get fans maybe only can go to this, and it's cool for fans, but it's actually going to hurt programs. The program now, West Virginia is now doing more of a spring showcase, a gold blue showcase. That word has been changed from game to showcase. A lot of pageantry and events last year with Brown, but even more so that, less of a game now. Would not be shocked if they scrap the spring game altogether based on what Rich Rod was saying, and obviously he cares about the fans, but there definitely seems like a concern from him that it is basically showcasing your players to other coaches. What are your thoughts on Rich Rod clearly kind of being against the spring game, and separately, if you need a spring game in college football, if that's a problem in college football, because there are people that bring up, I get it's money, I get there's pressure, but you just cannot get rid of the spring game. This is just a gigantic problem. And other people say, we're not willing to lose players to do a spring game. There's kind of a double-edged sword there, that this is likely the beginning of the end of spring games.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is just the continued professionalization of college football.
Yeah.
And it's just another one of those things that's unique about college football that is going to get axed as they become more and more like the NFL. Unfortunately, like I think a spring game done right has a lot of value to fans, has a lot of value to a team. Um, and you might say, well, it's not
Yeah.
even a real practice or this or that. I do, like, done right. I do think it can do a lot for fan base. I do, it's a fun event. It makes college football, but there's a lot of things like that that are just getting rid of. Like I said,
Yeah.
as we become more and more like the NFL, and I think that's a bad thing. Um, I
Are you
the
surprised that
coach,
Rich Rod has that opinion though? Because he's saying he's agreeing with a lot of younger
yeah,
coaches. He's in his
is
60s. He's more of an old school mentality, as we talked about with the player roster. But yet he's clearly willing to go to more of a younger mentality with these coaches. Sark, Matt Rule, these are coaches 20 years younger than him that are saying it doesn't help you to do a spring game. He's agreeing with them when there are some that actually seem surprised that would have thought Rich Rod would, being a West Virginia guy, would not want to have his first spring press conference where he's clearly hinting at yanking something from the fans.
yeah. It's I am surprised because I have always had more respect, even if it's like slightly more, for the coaches that aren't afraid to put out depth charts in injury
Right.
reports and now have a spring game, because it's
I
like
agree.
that. And maybe you have to do it at the highest level to win a national championship. You have to be paranoid about depth charts like James
Yep.
Franklin, and you have to be paranoid about injury reports like Texas, and now you
Yeah.
have to yank spring games. I I, I don't like that. Like and it's very small. Not like that doesn't ruin my perception of me, but it's very small. It's like I don't like that. Like, just put the depth
Okay.
chart out. Who cares? Like,
You know who was afraid of it though, that was not a national
Neil,
contender? Neil Brown.
Neil
Neil
Brown,
Brown
yeah,
gave you or constantly. He would leave the announcement of who's going to be the starter. If you remember, there was one year before the brawl. He didn't even want to announce it until almost kickoff, and Pat Narduzzi came out there and said, "I already know it's going to
yeah.
be JT. Like,
It's
what are we doing?" And then
yeah,
and then Neil the next day released, like, we agree, it's JT basically. But in the presser an hour before Narduzzi, he was trying to tell us to our face we don't have a starter yet. Clearly, just trying to posture with the opponent. But Neil was a big depth chart guy, and he even, if I remember correctly, there was even one presser where he even literally said, I do agree. Basically, he was saying, Cody, I agree with you. I think it's stupid not to put out the injury report, but I'm not doing it until everybody else starts doing it.
that was
He,
before the first Penn State game. He basically said James isn't going to do it, so I'm not going to do it and give
so I'm
them
not
an
going to do it.
advantage.
Yeah,
And that's where, like, and I hate to bring this up, but like, if the NCAA cared or had power,
sure.
like, they could mandate these things. They don't care to, and they probably don't have the power to.
Couldn't you fudge it anyway? The NFL mandates thing,
Yeah,
and
you
Bill
absolutely could.
Belichick had Tom Brady questionable for 20 years.
You absolutely could.
I mean, the Patriots basically lied about depth charts all the time, about
Yeah,
injury reports all the time, and all their scandals. They never faced anything for that. People just knew, well, Tom Brady is going to play unless he had a serious injury. But Bill Belichick would put out there that Tom Brady's questionable. He wasn't doubtful. He wasn't out. He was questionable. I mean, everyone's banged up and everyone's probably questionable every given day in the NFL. But
yeah.
that's what they did. So there are coaches who would still do that and find their way around it. What I do find a little interesting is, yeah, it's true. You have a spring portal after the spring game, and honestly, I think out of any portal we can debate, and we're not going to fully get into it here. The spring portal probably is more fair than even the December portal. The December
Mhm.
portal does screw bowl season. It even kind of screws the playoff. Saw that even at Penn State with their backup bouncing. That portal sucks, and that date should probably change. But you do need a spring portal. I mean, we got a quarterback battle. There's a lot of battles, especially at WVU, with every battle being open, every quarterback position, kind of open, every position in general being open all the time. The guy who loses that position should have an ability to seek a chance to start elsewhere. Like that, your situation changes. Rich Rod's giving you nothing. That spring portal window should be open to be fair to those guys when there's so many battles and position battles that are open. With that said, having the window there, I get coaches being scared of, if I show out too much, other coaches are going to watch it because some of these are even on national TV and they're going to try to pluck my guys. Here's what I say to that, why I think that opinion's a little bit overblown and a little bit of a farce. and I saw a colleague bring this up. I actually will give credit to Paul Zeiss, who brought this up, one of my colleagues in Pittsburgh. There is not a legit coach in America, certainly at the Power 4 level, whether it's a winning program or otherwise, who has not at some point recruited, looked at, or become aware of every player in the country on all of these rosters. So the scenario that Rich Rod's talking about, that Matt Rule's talking about, that Sark's bringing up, of a coach is going to sit there and, for example, Rich Rod's going to do a spring game, and all of a sudden you're going to have a coach somewhere say, oh, wow, I never heard of that player. Look how good he is. I'm going to try to offer him a little bit more money, and I'm going to try to pluck him away from West Virginia in this spring portal. That's not as likely as the reality is that all those coaches already knew and had heard of all of these guys. So, yeah, it's not that they may not try to pluck. It's not that there's not tampering. There always is. You can't ever really get rid of it. It's always been going on. And I'm sure there's players that will impress more than they would have maybe when they were being recruited. But to act like these other coaches are not aware of who's on West Virginia's roster or any roster and haven't recruited them at some point is a bit crazy. I don't think you're pulling the wool over everyone's eyes with these secret players that Rich Rod or any coach thinks is going on. I think that's a little bit overblown, but I do think the compromise is, which is kind of what West Virginia's doing this year, you do something for the fans, you do something to distinguish it being college football. I do agree it does not have to be a spring game. Do a showcase, do different things. The final score, the actual game, never mattered anyway. We were getting to the point we hardly were even writing recaps. It was almost like, here's what Pat McAfee said versus an actual game recap for a spring game. So now it's a showcase event. It's for recruiting. It's still really good recruiting wise. You get alums to go. It's a big deal when you are a major program like WVU. They can do a lot. They are going to do something. They're not scrapping it all together. I don't think they're ever going to get rid of it altogether because they know a lot of people in their state can't go to games, especially as they rise ticket prices and all that. But showcase versus game makes a difference. That matters. That's more of what it should be probably. I do want to get to basketball here. So West Virginia won. They beat Cincinnati. That was a must win. You can't lose to a team that's, really worse off than you value-wise with a similar record that you already beat once. They almost blew it at the end, but they did win, and they needed Hansberry to be a double-double machine and other players than just Devon Small to step up to win that. They won it. They got a full-on rebounding effort. They did what they had to do. They won it. They got lucky at the end. They almost blew it, but they did win. Now with the schedule in front of them, because as we're speaking now, they still have a top 10 matchup with Texas Tech, and then you have home opportunities. There's nobody else ranked. You're going to have a conference tournament in front of you, of course. They have 16 wins. They're still in that top 50 of the net and Ken Palm. They do have 3 top 10 wins still, 4 ranked wins. Maybe they can get another one. Could have 4 top 10 wins, as insane as that is. It's a depleted roster. It's year one. Are they now a tournament lock? Like, is this a situation where unless they literally lose out, they're going to at least crawl into this NCAA tournament, and then that would obviously be a success for year one? Or did you see enough concerns of them almost losing and almost blowing the game that you still think, okay, they could still blow this?
I can't call them a lock in good consciousness.
Okay.
After what they've done after the past several weeks, because I don't have full confidence that they won't lose out. And that's the reality they've played themselves into.
Yeah.
I think Saturday, 39 minutes and 40 seconds of that game were perfect for West Virginia. And not that they played flawlessly and not that they didn't make mistakes, but that team had some adversity, grew up. I tweeted Amani Hansberry grew up immensely in the last 10 minutes of that game.
You mean against Cincinnati or the Baylor?
Against Cincinnati. It's Cincinnati.
Oh, when you said Saturday.
Okay. That's my
because they played strong against Baylor, but lost in overtime. That was Saturday, and that's a game that did not hurt them Ken Palm wise. And I said at the time, they didn't have that game. Losing that game did not matter. They didn't have to win that game. The problem, which is why they're on the bubble, is they lost to Kansas State, they lost to Arizona State.
Right.
You lose those games, they shouldn't have to be Baylor on the road. They shouldn't even have to be Texas Tech on the road. I think this is the same scenario, Cody, tomorrow. I think as long as they're not embarrassed, I don't think any committee members thinking they got to win that game. What you're saying, though, is they can't lose that and then go ahead and lose to UCF at home, for example, at the end of the year.
Right. And that's what I mean. Like, if the last 20 seconds against Cincinnati hadn't happened, I'd feel really, really good about this team right now.
Yeah.
And I'd say that was a turn it around, get right game. And like I said, it was perfect for that team insofar that they did exactly what they needed to do. Well, and then the last 20 seconds happen, and you're like, oh, damn, this team is deeply flawed and has bad lapses all the time and can lose games at the drop of a hat for no reason. And so that little bit of doubt is like, whatever happens at Texas Tech happens. Like, that game almost doesn't matter unless they win.
if they win, then they're a lock, right? If they win, they're a lock.
Then
Yeah,
absolutely.
they're a lock if they win that, right?
But let's just like what that game is what it is either way.
Yeah.
The next 4 games, to feel really, really good, I think you got to win 2 of those. And it's TCU, it's the 2 Utah teams, and it's UCF.
Yeah,
it's all rematches. None of those games are like, oh yeah, they're definitely going to win, because this team isn't like that right now. This isn't they're definitely going to beat UCF kind of team. Like, you can't say that, because like I said, even against Cincinnati, I felt so good about them at the end of that game when they were up 9, and then all of a sudden they were on the verge of blowing it. And like I said, it just reminds you of all the flaws this team has. And it's like, it doesn't wash away all the good from that game, or like I said, Amani Hansberry's performance or anything, but it cracks that door back open of like, crap, this team isn't perfect.
Yeah, and I mean that's been evident for a while. I do think what a lot of West Virginia fans are not getting, and this even happens with fans of any program or any team around the country, they're only watching their team. They're not watching what's going on around the country. So I think the reason why there's a lot of national media members that confuse fans, because I think there are a lot of fans that do see the games, they watch the game, they even watch the game intelligently and say, this does not look like a tournament team despite the resume. And then you get Fran Fraschilla and half of ESPN come out there after the win, and they all tweet up a storm. This is the reason why I'm asking. Fran Fraschilla literally said they're a tournament lock.
Yep.
That's been said by other people who don't even have a connection to the program nationally, and they go to the 3 ranked wins or the 3 top 10 wins, the 4 ranked wins, and they all love DeVries. He's very, very popular. But the reason why they're saying that, Cody, I do believe, is they know they're not dumb. They're not WVU alums. It's not like they're Pat McAfee just trying to pump up the program. They're saying that because they know West Virginia is a flawed team, but they also know the whole bubble's flawed. So when you have the whole bubble flawed and they have 3 top 10 wins, and now they're only a couple away from kind of that benchmark of 18, certainly the lock of 19, that's why Fran Fraschilla is sitting there saying, yeah, I mean, if they crawl to 1 more, 2 more wins, they have 3 top 10. How can they be ignored? And they're in Lenardi's every week. He has them on the bubble, but they're in. Andy Katz has them in. They've had them in for months despite these losses. It is really hard to blow it when you have 3 top 10 wins. It really is. I mean, they're giving them benefits of the doubt left and right, but they are a very flawed team. And I will also add, if didn't happen, Darren DeVries was able to joke about it. I don't know if you watched the presser. He was smiling. He was joking. We got more personality out of him than we had all year. But I think part of that is they did win, obviously. If they would have lost, I'd be asking you, are they a lock to be out? Because that would have been a real bubble popping loss. Now, you can make it up by beating Texas Tech, but I don't think anyone thinks they're going to do that. And that would have been a devastating loss. Not because Cincinnati is horrendous, they have a similar record, but because you beat them once on the road, and the way they played, that would have been a game blown. That would have been a game blown. And Javon Small admitted. He said, I miss my man. Can't be doing that. And even Cincinnati media looked at me and was like, yeah, you can't be doing that. I mean, Cincinnati media was sitting there saying, we're considering voting for you for Big 12 Player of the Year as well. We also get a vote. And like you're on the bubble. Like, you can't just be saying, miss my man. This needs to be a sense of urgency where there is no miss men. You can't, that was a wide open shot. 4-3, foot well beyond the line. They hit it, and then DeVries also joked, I've had that happen before, but we end up winning in overtime, and I'm not going to change my defensive system until we lose an OT in those situations. And we're looking there like, he just missed the shot, guy. Like, that's all that happened here. He just missed a shot. That goes in. I understand you could still win in overtime, but does anyone think the vibe would have been a victory in overtime if they hit that shot? No, I was there, and the Cincinnati players are really feeling themselves, and you get 6 points in 9 seconds. It was almost Reggie Miller there at the Garden. So yeah, that could have been an absolute catastrophe death knell, and then that would have cost everybody every award under the sun and probably popped the bubble. They did win, so you can joke about it if you DeVries and Small and everybody else and be as honest as you were. But Cody, when you hear all of that, you watch them almost blow a game. You know they've been upset at times, even though they have big wins, and you do know that they are depleted and they do not have a second NBA prospect in Tucker DeVries on the court. He's just in street clothes. It does lead you to believe that, okay, it could easily happen again. And if it happens again, they're probably going to lose. Like they're on, they can beat anybody, but they can lose to anybody. And they're certainly not immune to those issues. And even hearing them, it doesn't feel like, okay, we almost had this happen. We're so good, it'll never happen again. Let's joke about it. It almost feels like, do they really get how much they almost had their season thrown in the garbage? Like, I mean, again, like, yeah, you're a Big 12 Player of the Year candidate, but you can't just miss your man for the past 20, the final 20 seconds of games. So but they did start out strong. I think starting out strong the last two games is a major bonus. During the losses, they were real sluggish early in games. That's a difference to this recent skid with wins than what it was a couple weeks ago when it was a lot of losses as well.
Yeah. And Mike, I agree with you 100%. When you're talking about,
I'm gonna cut that out, by the way. Cody Nespor. Mike, I agree with you 100%. I'm just gonna take that out, use that as sound for me, put that on every show I do, put that everywhere, send that around the country, throw that on X. Yes, Cody Nespor saying, Mike, I agree with you 100%. Thank you.
In terms of like what the national media says about this team, and here's something really, really important to remember. And you're right. We are so close to it that we do see all the flaws in this team and think that they're probably worse than the national people do. But and here's why I Fran probably said they're a lock, because right now they have 16 wins. They have the best resume of any 16-win team
by far.
If they if they get 17 wins, they have the best resume of any 17-win team. If they get 18 wins, so no matter what win total they end with, they're going to have the best resume. And that's probably why Fran says they're a lock, because he doesn't think they're going to lose out. I don't. For the record, I don't think they're going to lose out either. I think they could.
I think 17 would really be an up in the air scenario. I do, and I've been saying this for weeks. I know a lot of fans say they got to get to 19. I feel like because they have the 3 top 10 wins, that if they get to 18, 2 more wins, they will, and it wouldn't be a good seed, and it would still be a little bit of a slide from where they were. I think if they get to 18, they're probably in that first weekend. Maybe they're in the first 4. Maybe they're a 12 seed. They're in, though. If they get to 19 wins, I think they're legit in, and they're avoiding the first 4, and they're in as a 9, 8, anywhere to a 7 seed, even if they get, and they win them all. So that's why I mean, they would have to basically lose out to not be in at this point.
Yeah. And it's like, let's say they get to 17 and that's all they have. The only solace is there's no 17-win team in the country that would get in at large ahead of them.
They probably would still get in, barely.
And the same with, like I said, if they get to 18, there's no 18-win team that's going to get an at-large bid ahead of them. And I think that's where West Virginia has the edge right now, is that the resume, and I said this way back when they were in the Bahamas, the resume is done. Your top wins, you have them all already. You don't have to worry about that. And that's why I said Texas Tech doesn't matter. Whatever happens, happens.
The only debate I can give you is BYU's now on the bubble and they did beat them.
Yeah.
That's the only debate of a team that could, if West Virginia would. So, for example, if West Virginia would only get to 17 wins and they would crawl in your BYU, you could be sitting there saying, they're getting the bump because they're getting the bump because they're the Mountaineers. And this is a different mentality. I also think West Virginia fans don't have an understanding of how this works dynamic wise. They feel like that nationally, the media hates the football program. They get undervalued. They don't promote themselves enough. We did a whole show on it that they partly are responsible, and they don't get bumps. I think that maybe they will now with McAfee involved. But even historically speaking, basketball-wise, it is a polar 180 opposite. The national media always bump them for Huggins. They've got in with less than 20 wins before. The analytics are usually good. They are in the Big 12, which is a big deal in basketball, even though it's not necessarily in football. The national media loves DeVries right now. The national media loves going there. They talk about Jerry West and the history there. the national media agrees with them claiming a title where it's not agreed upon in football. The national media is no way providing any examples of being against them in basketball the last 20 years. So they will get a benefit of the doubt that BYU, for example, will not get. And I could envision a scenario where BYU and West Virginia have the same wins, and BYU did beat them, and the committee says, no, we'd rather have West Virginia in, and they do have the resume. They would rather have them. So that's another thing. Like, I think they're going to get the benefit of the doubt in a tiebreaker scenario in pretty much every situation, barring losing out or maybe only having one more win. Certainly if they get to two more. BYU is the only debate because of that matchup and that they did beat them. But there might be a team sitting there saying they're getting screwed and West Virginia's getting the bump. I mean, Pitt is having no chance, and they beat West Virginia, and they kind of went up and down and had the same situation of the Mountaineers in recent weeks. They don't give the benefit of the doubt by college basketball national media, but WVU does.
And they don't have the wins this year.
Yeah, West Virginia's wins are just hard to ignore. I mean, you beat three top 10 teams.
Yeah. And, like, you bring up a good point with BYU, Mike. That rematch is next Saturday? Yeah, March 1st. So
it's coming up. They have another one, obviously.
Yeah, March 1st. So that's that 10 p.m. game. Oh.
Yeah. That's after Rich Rod, by the way, having a spring day. So we're gonna.
So that's gonna be a sneaky important game there if both these teams kind of hold position and are still in the bubble.
Could be a play-in game type of game. Yeah. And
BYU takes that. They sweep the season series against West Virginia.
But my point is that I mean, I don't know how many BYU fans are going to watch this, but I think there's a scenario, Cody. I think there's a scenario here that everyone needs to be ready for, and West Virginia fans would love this, but this could be an argument around the country. There is a scenario of West Virginia getting swept by BYU and getting bumped in ahead of BYU. That does exist. The 3 top 10 wins are impossible to ignore, even if you do lose to BYU twice. And let's face it, Fran Fischello, the national media, Jay Billis, these people making these comments about West Virginia being a lock to get in, they're already setting the groundwork that they are going to bump them in a tie-breaking scenario. So if you're BYU, you almost need to win out to make that not an issue. If they end up with the same record and they have swept them, but West Virginia gets another couple, like if they do win 2 more, but even still lose to BYU, I still think the Mountaineers would bump in. So BYU could get screwed here. That does exist. But yes, if you beat BYU, I think then that's it. You beat certainly if you beat Texas Tech, that doesn't even matter. Then you get four top 10 wins. You're not going to knock it in. But a Cincinnati loss would have absolutely basically been an eliminator in some respects, unless you won out. That just would have been so bad the way you lost. That'll do it for this live edition of the show. Did see we had a lot of action on X or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to keep throwing them there whenever we do these, and a lot of coverage coming up. And as I said, spring ball, basketball team in the tournament. Rich Rod, I don't know, he's going to be watching any basketball games because he's working the same day and during them. So a little different schedule there, but expect kind of a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday thing for the football coverage at the spring. And everything's open. Baseball season coming up, or is going on, not coming up, but baseball season coverage coming up is going on. They're obviously winning, and the schedule's changing frequently, so try to keep up with that. But that'll do it for this episode of the show. Find Mountaineer Report, WV Sports Now on YouTube, everywhere you get your podcast for the archive version. Find our coverage, again, at the site, WV Sports Now. And it's not going to be a boring spring covering the Mountaineers. That's pretty clear, as it very rarely is boring.